All right, guys, welcome back to a wonderful episode of the Casuals. We've been on a little bit of a drought here. I'm coming to you from the beautiful Grenadines. Luke is, of course, in Newtown, Pennsylvania. I don't know where I'd rather be, but we're ready to throw down, are we, Luke?
We're so ready, bro. I've been waiting for this moment, and I'm so excited to share this with you.
And look, we have this formatted a little differently this week because we're going to start with Ted's segment because Ted told me he's bringing the heat. So we'll see what he does. And then from there, we will have our own debate with our own slideshow, and we'll see where Ted's thoughts fit into all of it. So let's do that. He went vertical this time.
Oh,
Welcome back to the casuals. Welcome back to Ted's Talks. Unfortunately, my prediction streak has been broken as Joaquin Buckley defeated Colby Covington at UFC Tampa. The UFC break is taking a toll on all of us, but today I'm going to be talking about
No way.
oh, you're gatekeeping
They
the
don't
moment.
want, they do not want Ted to say its truth. They don't want it.
They don't want it.
Oh my goodness. I'm on Grenadine's Wi-Fi, dude. It's cooked out here. We might have to take a pause in this. We might have to put a pin in this, but we have to
All
come
right.
back to this. We're gonna build anticipation because we're gonna talk about our
Yep.
top 15, and then we're gonna let Ted do the talking for us at the end here. Okay?
Let's go. Let's
Let's
go.
let's do it because the show is live. So okay, our 15th greatest fighter of all time. I have Randy Couture. You have Alex Pereira.
Yep.
We're just gonna run through them really quickly, and then we're gonna argue. Okay? I just want to see your
All right.
picks.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect.
14, Lucas Kamar Usman. I have Alex Pereira. Okay. Okay, close. Sure. 13, Luke has Max Holloway. I have Henry Cejudo. 12, Luke has Randy Couture, and I have Max Holloway. 11, we both have Stipe, so not much to disagree on there.
There you go. Yeah.
I have Volkanovski at 10, and you have the person who has lost to Volkanovski, Josie Otto, at 10. At 9, you have Daniel Cormier, and I have Kamar Usman. 8, Henry Cejudo. For me, it's Daniel Cormier. 7, you have Volkanovski, and I have Anderson Silva. 6, you have Khabib Nurmagomedov. I have Demetrius Johnson. 5th, you have Islam Makhachev, and I have Jose Aldo. 4th, I have Islam Makhachev. You have Anderson Silva. 3rd, you have Demetrius Johnson. I have Khabib Nurmagomedov. 2nd, you have George St-Pierre. I have John Jones. And 1st, you have John Jones, and I have George St-Pierre. Now look, as we run through that, let's see if Ted's still buffering, dude. Let's see what Ted's doing. Let's see if Ted's okay.
two fighter
Oh,
match.
here we go. Here we go.
We're going to be talking about two fighters here, George St-Pierre and John Jones. We're going to
Okay,
start with
there we go.
GSP.
Perfect.
I think he's one of the most well-rounded fighters in UFC history. He ran through the welterweight division for almost a decade while using elite wrestling with striking and just an incredible fight IQ. He wasn't a one-sided fighter, and he could adjust to anybody, really showing how, there's levels to this, and that after coming back from a 4-year break, defeating Michael Bisping at UFC 217, he proved that he could still compete at the highest level. He was always about evolving his game and making, changes to defeat everybody as the division evolved. So I think that he is the greatest of all time, and I'll get into the reason why. But we're going to talk about John Jones now. Without a doubt, he's one of the best fighters that we've ever seen. He became, the youngest champ at only 23 years old, and right from the start, it was just clear that he was going to be great. He dominated the light heavyweight division, and he beat legends like Rampage Jackson all in their prime. And what sets him apart, in my opinion, is how creative he was. He would throw spinning elbows and all these different kinds of kicks and takedowns, and just doing things that nobody else could. And his fight IQ is insane too. Like he can read people, he can read his opponents and adjust to them mid-fight if he has to, or he does whatever it takes to beat them. And his only loss is a disqualification due to 12-6 elbows against Matt Hamill. So you could argue you could argue he's undefeated, but outside the cage, he's gotten into so many issues. He's got his bout against Daniel Cormier was canceled due to him testing positive for steroids. So there's things like that, and he just had so many issues in the octagon. And GSP, on the other hand, just like he just did his thing, and he dominated, and that's why I put GSP over John Jones due to not only the steroids. I know GSP had a little scuffle with steroids, but just the cleanliness of their career. I mean, GSP did his thing without having a lot of controversy, and that's why I just got to put him ahead. Well, it's great to be back. My name's Ted. As always, this has been Ted Talks, and I'll go back to you guys. That's my take.
All right, technical difficulty
I,
aside, let's just jump into the meat and potatoes
yeah.
of this. Look, we
Are
seem
we
to
gonna talk about
disagree
Ted?
here. Well, I'm in
Yeah, we
alignment
did.
with Ted for different reasons, but I want you to
Yeah,
explain why
I
you
was
would put John Jones over George St-Pierre before Ted and
right.
I disagree with you.
Well, I kind of disagree with Teddy in the fact that this when I think of making a GOAT list, like yes, I obviously am aware of all the controversies that John Jones has gone through. I'm aware of the hit and run. I'm aware of all these issues that he's had with steroids and drug tests and violence, all this stuff. But personal life aside, like I'm not putting that into my personal opinion, especially when I put it into like a GOAT list. Like I feel like you try to it's best if you remove human emotion for most of this. And yes, he's a bad person and maybe he's changed, whatever. I don't care. I think that his record speaks for itself. Yes, he's had some controversial victories. But when it comes down to it, like I'm no different than anyone else who says, "Oh, John Jones number one." Like he, unfortunately, I don't have something that I can surprise you with. I think he's the best. I think GSP is obviously a close second, but John Jones, he's the youngest champion. He's dominated not everyone, but he's gone two divisions. He succeeded in both, and I just think that he deserves that number one spot, regardless of the issues and controversies he's had.
Look, this is where I don't see eye to you because if you look at the wins that George St. Pierre has in his career, right, his best wins, whether that be Matt Hughes, who we beat twice, BJ Penn, who we beat twice, who I'm shocked is not on either one of our lists because he's right outside of that list. He beat Nick Diaz, he beat Carlos Condit, he beat Johnny Hendricks in a very close fight. Michael Bisping, he beat. Those are all dominant wins. Those are all dominant wins. He did not have very many close fights. His closest fights were he lost a round to Carlos Condit in a 10-8 and won the remainder of the fight and his fight against Johnny Hendricks, which is today still debated as one of the closest welterweight fights of all time. A fight that I think George St. Pierre won. Let's look at John
Hmm.
Jones. John Jones, in the latter part of his career, he fought Thiago Santos with a torn ACL and barely beat him, in my opinion. Lost to Dominic Reyes, in my opinion. He refuses to fight Tom Aspinall at this point. Whatever happens in 2025, we'll see. But he's delayed the division for at least a year or two in terms of his progression and has hurt the UFC significantly. He barely beat Gustafsson, in my opinion. A lot of people would argue that he didn't. And then outside of that, he was fighting guys that were middleweights. Chael Sonnen was a middleweight. Lyoto Machida was a middleweight. You see what I'm saying? Like he's fighting this lower level of skill for his entire career against guys that he really shouldn't have been fighting. His best wins are Rampage Jackson, 10 years after Rampage was in Pride. I mean, let's be real. What I'm saying is John Jones is an
Right.
incredible martial artist. He is one or two. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave the steroids aside because look, this happens. John Jones has been proven to cheat. I think it should disqualify him entirely. But if we're going to allow that, I'd put him at two on the basis of the quality of his wins. The people that he beat dominantly were worse fighters than George St. Pierre beat dominantly. And the people that were better, he had very close fights with. George St. Pierre has only
Yeah.
had one particularly close fight in his entire career that he has, despite the two losses that he has on his record in the UFC.
I mean, I understand that, but I also feel like all the wins that you were talking about from GSP, I mean, Jones has like two of the guys that he's beaten are on my GOAT list. Cormier and Miocic are on there. Like, despite where they were at in their career when it happened or what particular issues were going on, like those are still notable wins. And I don't know. I feel like he's if he's beaten two other of these other 15 GOATs that I have listed, that kind of holds some weight, especially since GSP, I don't think I have anyone that he's beaten on here that's in my list.
So let's move down the list. I'm going to pivot here to make a point. But you and I both have Max Holloway as 13 and 12 respectively. We both have Stipe at 11. If Max Holloway went out there and beat Tony Ferguson this year, destroyed him, which he would, is that still a notable win?
Um,
The answer is
I don't
no. The answer
I
is
don't
no,
think
which
it is,
makes
but
Stipe Miocic not a notable win in John Jones' career because Stipe Miocic had gotten knocked out 4 years prior and hadn't fought since. And when Stipe Miocic came out here, he was a shell of himself. He was barely walking. He came out in a
but
in a sling the year before. It's a complete disaster. There was no reason for that fight to ever happen.
But
That
Stipe
was not a
Miocic
win.
is considered the GOAT of the heavyweight division. Keep in mind, a division where one shot can end it all. And lightweight, Tony Ferguson was never considered the lightweight GOAT. And at the same time, when you talk about Ferguson, like he's on a significant losing streak. And yeah, yes, like Stipe might be coming off a loss, whatever, but that's still it's completely different comparison. I don't even think that really like fits. at
I
all.
think it fits perfectly. I think it fits perfectly because look, we're looking at a guy like Stipe, who's arguably the heavyweight goat. You have Randy Couture right beneath him, which we'll talk about later. I think that's
Mhm.
abhorrent too. I think Stipe Miocic is clearly the heavyweight goat. Stipe Miocic in his entire career has one flash knockout in the UFC, one, and it was against Fabricio Verdum. He has never since then had a one hit quit knockout cold. Against DC, he couldn't knock him out. Against Francis Ngannou in the first fight, he couldn't knock him out. Against anyone he's been against Overeem, he couldn't knock him out. Not flush. It was ground and pound. JDS didn't happen. You see, Steven Miocic was never a powerhouse like say an Ngannou or someone like that. He was a different type of heavyweight. He was a more skilled heavyweight. John Jones fought him without any of his athleticism and beat him in a dominant fashion. Sure, he won 3 of the 4 rounds and then stopped in the fourth. Sure, but not in a capacity where I can see it as a notable win, if you will. I just don't buy that. George St-Pierre fought the champion Michael Bisping, who was coming off a win, and submitted him in the second round after dominating him and dropping him. That's very different than John Jones beating anyone at heavyweight except for Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane I would count as a good win. Cyril Gane just lost to Alexander Volkov. I don't care what the judges said. He lost to Alexander Volkov. Volkov's never going to touch a title. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Let's move down the list a little bit. I think we have some interesting picks here, in that you have Khabib Nurmagomedov as the number 6 fighter of all time. I have him at 3. That's a pretty big
Mhm.
gap because there's some pretty great fighters between us. We have Demetrius
Yeah.
Johnson and at 6 and 3 respectively, and then we have Anderson Silva is in the mix too, and Islam Makhachev is in the mix. Walk me through your thought process of putting Khabib at 6,
Yeah,
Islam at 5, Anderson at 4, and DJ at 3. Give me that ranking.
I
Let's
think,
break it down.
yeah, I definitely don't think Khabib is number three in my eyes. I mean, Mighty Mouse, he fought, dominated 2 divisions, holds the UFC record for most consecutive title defenses. He has 11. Khabib, like, yes, he has a great legacy, but he retired at 33. He only defended his belt 3 times. In what world is that more impressive than like, 11 straight title defenses?
Look, this is where context matters. And I'm not a big, this is the context of the MMA. I want to see who's the most skilled guy. That's why I think the modern era of the UFC is the most talented. It has the most great fighters. But look, this is a different type of contextual argument. Let me make my argument. Khabib had, I believe, 10 fights in the UFC before sniffing a title shot.
Yeah.
Demetrius Johnson got it in his third UFC fight, if I remember correctly. Very quickly. It doesn't matter. Either the numbers don't matter in this instance, but it
Yeah,
was a very
it
quick
was
fight and a
quick. It
very
was
long
quick
fight.
and through.
So of course Khabib's never gonna have that many title defenses. Who did he beat on his way up? He beat the number 1 contender Rafael dos Anjos, and then fought Michael Johnson thereafter for no reason. He beat Edson Barbosa on the way up. He beat so many great guys. He beat so many guys. He beat Gleison Tibau in a very close fight, the closest fight he ever had, which he did. I've watched. He won that fight. He never
Mhm.
got cut. He never got knocked down. He dropped Conor McGregor in his prime. He fought everyone they put in front of him. He beat Gaethje, who's a Division 1 wrestler, and out wrestled him easily. Beat Poirier in the most dominant fashion anyone's ever beat Poirier outside of Justin Gaethje. I mean, look at it. Like you can't. You have to separate the title defense argument. I know it's an argument a lot of people make, but that comes from a place of ignorance because they don't understand the history that Khabib fought so many times without getting a title shot when he should have gotten one at least 2 or 3 years before he did. And if he fought the guys he fought on the way up as title fights, which he wouldn't have, then he would have beaten all of them in more decisive fashion, if anything. You look at Demetrius
Right.
Johnson, came into a division. Now Demetrius Johnson is the most skilled fighter we've ever seen in the UFC, in my opinion. He's just the most talented. However, look at who he was fighting: Ray Borg, Joseph Benavidez. He lost to Dominic Cruz. He lost to Henry Cejudo. He went 1-1. Let's just say that. John Dodson, who is a very underrated fighter of all time. But if you look at the modern flyweight division, I don't know how many of these guys he beats. To be honest, I mean, he was fighting in a weak division for a long time, and that didn't make him any less talented. But what I'm saying is, it's easy to do flying arm bars and spinning heel kicks and everything when you're fighting Ray Borg. It's much harder to do that when you're fighting Edson Barbosa and Rafael dos Anjos. There's a gap there, you know what I'm saying? So that's sort of my whole argument, is that there's a big discrepancy in how we understand this because of course title defenses do matter, and they matter if we're looking at the same era, but we're not. We're looking at two completely different levels of talent. That's why,
Yeah.
and
I,
I'm
I
going to go up to
understand your
this.
point. Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I have Randy Couture at 15. Now, Couture is one of
Right.
the most, in my opinion, the most underrated fighter ever because of his conflict with Dana
Yeah.
White and how it destroyed his image and whatever. In the octagon, he was incredible. He was really great, but he was fighting at a time where the guys he was fighting weren't that good. They just weren't. He lost
Hmm.
to Rick Rodriguez. He lost to Josh Barnett. He wasn't incredible, right? I want to hear why you have him at 12 because I want to hear your argument, but I don't understand it at all.
Because
15, I think, is nice for him.
I feel like I value personally longevity. Like this guy was still winning titles in his 40s. Like to me, that's I mean, I don't know who you're trying to compare it to, but yeah, I put him below Miocic. Like and 12, he could have been 13, 12. Like I don't see him being 15. Like it's that's just something that I feel like is subjective to the point where it's hard to argue. I think that two divisions, he was light heavyweight and heavyweight. He was both like impressive in both, and he was like when I know Khabib, like we were just talking, like yes, he retired really early, and to me, like that's kind of important. Like that's why I put him a little bit lower. I feel like longevity is important. I feel like in terms of a legacy, like this is more ranking legacy, and I'm impressed by Randy Couture. I think that matters to me.
Look, I understand that, and it makes sense. I mean, he didn't compete in the UFC in his athletic prime ever, right? Because the UFC didn't
Yeah,
exist when he was in his athletic prime. He was fighting guys younger than him, like Chuck Liddell, like Tito Ortiz. I get that, and I respect that point. However, I would combat it by saying if you exclude what he did at heavyweight, which was incredible because he was so small for the weight class, when he was fighting guys like Brock Lesnar, he was
yeah,
half of Brock Lesnar's size.
it's crazy.
You look at what he did at light heavyweight and just isolate that, and it's not that consistent. I mean, again, he's fighting younger guys and guys like Vitor Belfort in better shape, but at the same time, it's I can't, if it was today, how good would he be? That's my question. How good would Randy Couture be
Yeah.
in today's MMA? I don't think very good. I don't think he could be great. I think he would lose to, say, an Alex Pereira, which is why I have Alex Pereira ranked slightly above him. I think he would lose to Daniel Cormier. I think he'd lose to Stipe Miocic. I think he'd lose to every other light heavyweight and heavyweight we have on the list. John Jones. Um, I think I understand your point. I think longevity is important, but then I would say, look, if we're looking at all-time light heavyweights, why aren't the most credentialed light heavyweights that highly ranked? Why is Glover
Mhm.
Teixeira not a top five light heavyweight of all time? Because he was inconsistent. Randy
Yeah.
Couture is the same way. He wasn't a consistent UFC fighter. He was great, and he's top 15 all time on both of our lists, which I think is incredible, given the longevity he had and how long it's been since he was in the sport at a high level. But at the same time, I just can't justify putting him above, say, an Alex Pereira, a guy that is also older, but has found a way to win in more spectacular fashion against a higher caliber of opponent.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I think it's a little silly, like the argument of how would they fight like now in the UFC because that's kind of an impossible thing to determine. I mean, these guys they're you can't like rewind time and match make them with current fighters. I feel like they got what they were matchmaked with at that time. So I'm only ranking them based on that. I don't know. I feel like in terms of you see what I'm trying to get at?
I get you. I get you. And I'll pivot here
Yeah.
because
Right.
we have
Yeah.
this is going to be a nice conversation to have because this is a conversation that a lot of the fans are having, and we have different perspectives on this clearly. Because you have Josie Aldo ranked at 10 all time, and I have Alexander Volkanovski ranked at 10. You have Volkanovski at 7. I have Aldo at 5.
Mm.
So I'm of the camp that not only is Aldo better than Volkanovski all time, he's a good bit better than Volkanovski all time. You seem to believe, according to this ranking, that Volkanovski is considerably better than Aldo, 3 spots. Do you find that to be, you know, do you find that to be a fair, assumption based on the ranking criteria? And if so, I'd like you to explain yourself as to why you find Volkanovski to be a greater featherweight all time than Jose Aldo. Because at the very least, these are similar eras, similar weight, the same weight class. We can discuss this in a more equitable way than say, John Jones versus Randy Couture. That's 15
Yeah.
years apart, right? So,
Yeah.
I'd like to get your point on this.
Yeah, well, I think that like quite simply, like it comes down to the people he's beat. Like I, I don't know. Like Aldo, like yes, he was a dominant champion. Like he had a couple defenses. But Volk, like I know I'm on his hype train, but he's far surpassed Aldo in my opinion. Like the, up until Ilya, like it seemed like he was undefeatable. And beating Max Holloway 3 times is like that's insane, especially because we both have Max Holloway like pretty high on this list. I mean, actually not I have him 13, but it's just like he's still in this list and beating him 3 times is insane. Like I don't know. I feel like that holds a lot of value to me. It matters, man. Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, and yes, he loses to Islam. Um, and I don't know. I think that that makes sense. Like, yes, he's at I put him at 7 and Aldo's at 10. Like, I don't think that that's that big of a gap. But yeah.
Look, here's what I'll say. Volkanovski, I'm gonna completely just ignore the lightweight side of it because he's not big enough to be a lightweight. He just isn't. By the same token, Aldo was never big enough to be a featherweight. He was always a natural bantamweight, and he was fighting at such a time where bantamweight did not exist in the WEC. And look, I don't want to talk too much about WEC because this is a UFC based list. This is why we have fighters like Fedor Emelianenko who are not represented here. But what I'll say is, within the UFC, Aldo beat every single fighter in front of him. Some of which are all-time legends, guys that could be on this list, and I would not be mad at guys like Uriah Faber, guys like Frankie Edgar, who is easily top 20, maybe top 15, not for either one of us, but I could see that argument. Chad Mendes, one of the most underrated fighters of all time. Cub Swanson, he knocked out in, what, 15 seconds. Chito Vera, he beat in the later stages of his career. I thought he beat Mario Batista this year. That was what, a few months ago. He's almost 40. He's almost 40 now. I mean, look at it. Of course, the loss to Conor McGregor will haunt him for the rest of time. That was one of the most embarrassing championship performances we've ever seen. I understand that. However, for the 13 years before that, I believe, he hadn't lost a fight. He was fighting WC championships, UFC championships, and didn't lose. And not only did he not lose, he was winning incredible battles. And look, I know entertainment and aura is not part of the criteria, but he was winning entertaining fights decisively, big knockouts at featherweight. He built the division effectively. He's the reason we have it in the UFC. Volkanovski, for all his credit, the third fight against Max Holloway is the greatest MMA performance I've ever seen. No one has looked better in a fight at the UFC level than that. Because look, we look at Holloway versus Cater. Cater got, mollywopped, but Cater was not the guy that Max Holloway is, right? You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that if we look at that, those are the two greatest performances I've ever seen with my own two eyes. Maybe the McGregor fight in Madison
Yeah.
Square Garden, maybe against Eddie Alvarez, maybe. Those are probably the three. But what I'll say is I would put Volkanovski at number one. Volkanovski in his prime, in my opinion, loses to Jose Aldo in his prime. And I'll tell you why. Jose Aldo was fighting guys like Chad Mendes, who are stylistic nightmares for him. Disaster matchups. Volkanovski primarily only fought strikers in the UFC except for an old Chad Mendes, right?
Mm,
Chad Mendes gave him a lot of trouble at featherweight. He gave Aldo trouble too, but Aldo beat him pretty decisively 2 times. Volkanovski struggled in the first round against him, and then fought a striker, a striker, a striker, a same striker 3 times, and then he fought a wrestler at lightweight and lost twice. Then, when he fought a grappler at featherweight, he lost again. So what we're seeing is, in a similar vein to how a lot of people make arguments like Khabib and Nurmagomedov, which I find to be untrue, is we see matchups that are favorable to Volkanovski for the duration of his career. And that's not a discredit to Volkanovski, because those are the
yeah,
best guys that were in front of him.
right.
But outside of Brian Ortega, he fought no one that wasn't a striker. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So what I'm saying
yeah.
is when you look at Aldo, Aldo was fighting tougher stylistic matchups at a time where he got less appreciation, was more dominant for a longer period of time, and I think in both of their respective primes, at featherweight, which is a small weight class, a big weight class for Aldo, and a small weight class for Volkanovski,
Yeah.
I think Aldo would beat him. So that's why I have Aldo so high up. I think Aldo is just
Right, but
his prime was so dominant.
yeah, but I mean, I feel like that's already kind of been they've fought,
But
and
they fought when Aldo
especially
was in his 30s and Volkanovski was the champion. This is not the same Aldo that we saw in 2012.
I know, but I mean, early 30s isn't. I would argue that he was maybe just concluding his prime. I mean, it
I wouldn't
wasn't
argue
too
that.
far off.
Because here's the thing:
It
is you
wasn't
look
too
at
far off of what you're arguing.
this is going to undermine my entire argument, but I'll explain why. Alex Pereira and Josie Aldo are the same age right now.
Hmm.
However, Alex Pereira was not fighting when he was 15. Josie Aldo was fighting in the world championship of his weight class when he was like 19, 20.
Yeah,
He's been fighting for basically half of his life in
right,
the highest levels of mixed martial arts. Alex Pereira has been in mixed martial arts, what, 5 years now? And I
right, right,
understand
right.
kickboxing puts miles on the clock too, but the kickboxing age is much older than the MMA age, usually, for primes.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's the same thing. I
So
think there's
obviously he's
miles
going
in the
to have
clock.
his prime a little earlier.
So if I get a new car and I drive it every day for 2 years and it has more mileage than a car from 30 years ago that's never been taken out of its garage, which car would I rather have? See what I'm saying? It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I understand. I understand. I understand.
So that's my argument. I think there's more miles on the clock. I don't think that's a fair argument that they're both approximate the same ages. We'll see what happens with Volkanovski. I think you can even discredit the Islam loss and the Topuria loss, and he could retire right now, and I would still put
Mhm.
Aldo over him. I don't think it
Okay.
matters that much. I don't think the losses. I don't think because look, we look at Anderson Silva. I have him at 7. You have him at 4, which isn't too much of a discrepancy. I understand he had a really bad run at the end of his career. I don't look too much
Right.
into that. He had injuries. He had issues. He had steroids. I thought he beat Bisping. Um, so there's a lot of mistakes going on there, right?
Yeah.
But if we look at his prime, Anderson Silva is one of the greatest of all time, easily. I mean, I've met 7, you met 4. However, like you said, longevity also matters. So there's a lot of factors at play here. I do want to call attention to one more thing. You have Kamaru Usman at 14 all time. I have him at 9.
Yeah, it's a pretty big difference.
That's the last one I want to call attention to because this has been contentious. It's been intense, but it's been good. It's been a good way to work out our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And Ted's on my team, so I like him more than I used to, and I already love that kid. So let's talk about DC DC. Actually, it's not. We're close on
DC
DC.
Usman.
Let's talk about Usman.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do you have Usman
Well,
at
I think that
14 and I have him at 9? I want to hear your take on why you have him at 14.
Well, personally, I think that yes, he like dominated welterweight, and that's pretty well known. But in comparison to other guys on this list, like just generally, it's kind of hard to explain why you have him at 9. But like he had back-to-back losses to Leon Edwards, and we look at what Leon Edwards is now, like losing to Bilal. If we're going by your argument of, let's see how these guys like fight against current fighters in the UFC and stuff like that, then I feel like it's silly to have him at 9. I mean, he would lose to Bilal. He would lose. He's already lost to Khamzat. I don't think he's the future of his career. I mean, it's pretty poor if he fights again.
Look, I don't disagree with you there, but what I'll say is that in his prime, Usman won 15 fights in a row.
Hmm.
Volkanovski couldn't do that. Stipe couldn't do that. Holloway couldn't do that. So there was only one other person on this list that could do that. His name was Anderson Silva, and he's above Kamaru Usman for me. And I'll explain why I have Usman so high. Usman was fighting again. We're talking about styles, stylistic nightmares for him. Jorge Masvidal was a great boxer. That one I'm gonna dissuade because Masvidal had a pretty rough career after the Usman losses. And probably should have never fought for a title after the short notice fight in the first place. Covington is one of the best pressure wrestlers we've ever seen. So it forced Usman to evolve his kickboxing, and he knocked him out, and then dropped him
Hmm.
multiple times in the second fight. Look at Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns is a great boxer, an incredible boxer. The worst matchup stylistically for Kamaru Usman because he's such a great striker, and he's got some of the best jiu-jitsu we've ever seen in the history of the UFC. So we're looking at a guy who can literally do everything on every position to thwart Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman walks him like a dog. He beat Sean Strickland when Sean Strickland was coming up. I don't put much weight into that because Sean Strickland's much better now, but we can say that too. He had, like Khabib, had such a long road to the title that of course he doesn't have that many title defenses. Not as many as a Volkanovski or as a someone that has been around and got not gifted but got a title shot when they deserved it, as opposed to an Usman or a Khabib where they had to wait in line for so long for the division to sort itself out. I mean, look what Kamaru Usman did to Tyron Woodley, another incredibly good fighter. He completely he ended Woodley's career. This is a guy
Right.
who, in the modern era, in the most challenging, in the era with there's the most turnover of champions ever, was dominant for 3 years and was active consistently. Let's look at let's look at the guys you have above Usman and the people I have below
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Stipe didn't fight in the modern era really and wasn't very active, right? Stipe beat DC, sure. Those are his best wins. Lost to John Jones, which again disqualify it. Lost to DC, lost to Ngannou, lost to JDS, lost to Stefan Struve. No, he beat Stefan Struve. I apologize, but he lost to good guys. I mean, Stipe has a great resume, one of the best resumes, probably the best resume in heavyweight history.
Yeah.
I understand that's close, that's contentious. I'm fine with that. Volkanovski, fine, but putting him putting Max Holloway above Kamaru Usman is insane to me. I can't buy that. I can't. Because if you look at Max Holloway, one of the greatest champions we've ever had. I mean, as a pure champion, incredible. However, he's a guy that since Volkanovski came in, can't win. He can't win a title. Right? Even when Volkanovski
Mhm.
lost, he lost to Ilia Topuria in dominant fashion. Ilia Topuria, by the way, will be on this list in under 2 years, in my opinion. Because of how it's whatever. We can talk about that
Yeah,
later. I think
within 2025, maybe he could slip in at like number 15,
if he
honestly.
fights twice in the next year,
Yeah,
I think he'll win both his fights, and I think he will be consensus one of the
yeah,
top 15 if he wins both fights at featherweight or if he moves it to lightweight and beats Islam. That's another
yeah.
conversation. Um, but Holloway in his prime was incredible. There's no doubt about it. However, we see a guy that's lost to Volkanovski 3 times. A guy who's lost to Dustin Poirier twice, who's not on this list for either one of us. Also
Mhm.
close to the list, but not on the list. By the way, Dustin Poirier, greatest resume in combat sports, in my opinion.
I agree.
Kamaru Usman is a guy who lost to Hamza Chimaev in a very close fight, Leon Edwards in a very close fight twice, and that's it. Those are his
Right, but I
only
mean,
losses in the UFC ever. Two
we were
razor
just talking,
losses in the
but
tail
let's
end of
talk
his
about his
prime.
wins for a second, because you were just hyping Jose Aldo up so much. I mean, he's beat this guy twice. I don't understand where that argument that we were just having, like 2 wins over Aldo. I mean, we're talking about yes, he's lost to Volk 3 times, but if Aldo's as good as you say he is, I don't think it's a crime to put Holloway at number 13 and Usman at 14. Like,
Well,
yes, it's competitive, but I think Holloway, Couture, Miocic, uh, where did you have? You had him at 9. So, and I think yeah, I think those 4 guys have all had better careers.
I just don't think so because I think that Holloway. Let's look at Usman and let's look at Edwards. Right, Edwards is a worse
Hmm.
fighter all time than Volkanovski. That's easy to say. That's easy, right?
Yeah,
However, Edwards stylistically is worse for Usman than Volkanovski is for Holloway because Holloway and Volkanovski are both strikers and they had 2 very close fights.
okay.
That's why I have Volkanovski so much higher than Holloway for me is because of the way that Holloway fell apart in the third fight and Volkanovski adapted to beat him in both of their
Yeah,
respective primes. Look, Holloway is still in his prime. He is. When we look at Usman, we have a guy that was genuinely unbeatable for 3 years. No one on the planet Earth at his weight class or below could beat him at all. At all. He couldn't, and he probably would have beaten most middleweights too. Now he's a little older now. He fought a stylistic nightmare twice in Hamzat and in Leon, who are different fighters but are both
hmm,
nightmares. And I just find that those are not indicative of his greatness. Those just aren't. In
yeah,
the same way that the McGregor loss isn't indicative of Aldo's, in the same way that I would even argue that the Topuria loss isn't particularly indicative of Holloway's in his defense.
yeah.
But the
Right.
Volkanovski losses in his prime, those are what I'm looking at. The losses that Aldo suffered, which he didn't suffer any in his prime, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at in their prime, who was the greatest, and I'm not as worried about the late stages of their career like an Anderson Silva.
Correct. Well, I mean, look how high I have Anderson Silva on my list. I don't think that, I mean, I literally have him at number 4. So, despite his recent losses, like it doesn't really matter to me. I think that one of the issues with these top 15s is literally they're so competitive because there's so much talent that when you weigh these options, there's literally it's hard. It's one of the
Yeah,
hardest things to do.
absolutely.
This has been a challenge. You know what I mean? One last thing. I know that we probably run low on time, but
We are.
I think it is Islam. I have Islam over Khabib. You have it inversed.
I
So
do.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that it's in the coming years that could flip, and maybe
Yeah.
this is like a pre-fire on my part, but I 100% think that Islam is a better fighter of than Khabib in almost every aspect at this point, and he's tied with the amount of title defenses. I know that's not a thing that you like because it's a shallow point,
Sure.
but I think that like that I don't see why Khabib would be over him. Yes, he's undefeated. Does one loss in his early career really matter that much to Islam's is that really to Islam's detriment that much? I don't think
I don't.
so.
I'm not looking at the loss. I'm actually looking at the performance against similar opponents.
Hmm.
Poirier was better when he fought Islam than when he fought Khabib. He was a better fighter. There's no doubt about it.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
Islam finds himself in close fights. He has multiple times in his career. He's less dominant. He finds himself getting hurt more often. His style is less apt for MMA than Khabib's is. Now look, Islam is more talented as a martial artist than Khabib. I will give you that.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have 30 seconds left in the broadcast, so we're gonna have to wrap this up. We're gonna
Okay, that's
pause
good.
this and bring this next time because next time we are here, we'll be discussing the UFC 311 card where Islam will try to defend himself against Arman Tsarukyan, and we're gonna skip the fight night because nobody cares about that. We're gonna go straight into UFC 311. We'll discuss Islam, whether he's better than Khabib, and all of that next week. Thank you, Luke, for joining me. This has been No
Thank
Casuals.
you, brother.
We will see you hopefully next week.